In this video, we're going to take a look at a failed product from the year 2000. At this time, the world was right in the midst of the dot-com bubble. Many companies were releasing products trying to predict what was going to be the next new thing. One such concept was the idea of an internet appliance, a small, stripped-down computer running a custom operating system designed purely for internet use, such as web browsing and checking emails. One such device was the Ergo Audrey, released by 3com in October of 2000. The Audrey ran a custom operating system based on QNX, which provided web browsing, email, calendar and address book functionality. However, due to lack of interest for such a product, as well as the dot-com crash, the Audrey was discontinued in June 2001 after less than 8 months on the market. So in this video, we're going to take a look at one of these, see how it runs, see what it can do, and then take it apart and see how it's built. So what I have here is an original Ergo Audrey, even in its original shipping box. So as you can see on the front, it's got a shipping label from USPS. So that means this must have originally come from the US and cost $37 to be shipped. This was probably the shipping to the UK. And we can see the date here. This was shipped in October 29th, 2001. So this was long after it had been discontinued. Now the key thing with these is when they were discontinued, they were sold off really cheaply. So 3com sold them off along with all the retailers. So people bought them quite a lot of people bought them after it had been discontinued. And there was a sort of big hardware hacking community grew up around this to run different firmware on it and make it do different things. Very similar to the HP touchpad thing from sort of 2011, I think that was. In this video, I'll be unboxing the HP touchpad. If you're not aware of the whole touchpad thing, HP released this tablet not that long, a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago or something, and then decided to kill it off this week because it wasn't selling anything, and yeah. And in doing that, they decided to drop the price, as you can see here, to £89. So this came from the US, and as we can see on the side, we have the original shipping label. So it's an Ergo Audrey linen. Linen's the colour. And we can see that this was packed on the 27th of November, the year 2000. So this was right before it was discontinued. And now what makes me think that this one was actually one of the ones that was sold off after it had been discontinued is the sticker on the top. So we take a look at this. It effectively says that you don't get any warranty with it, 3com won't be liable for anything, and the channel features described in the manual will not be operational. So this looks like this was actually sold after it had been discontinued, and this is basically just clearing 3com of any liability for this device, because they didn't want to support it. They were just like, we just want to get the stock gone, so we'll sell them off with no warranty or channel features. So now let's take a look at what we get. So that's just the outer box. We've actually got the proper retail box in here as well. So pull that out. And here we have the retail box. From the packaging, you can sort of see how it was marketed. It was marketed as a really easy to use device just to have in your house, probably in your kitchen or bedroom, something like that. And they're designed to be really sort of personal and friendly and easy to use. So we can see on the front here, it's got the big Ergo branding, 3com logo, and there's a sort of top-down picture of the device itself, and it just says, "This is Audrey." On the top, we've got a thing saying another picture saying, "Audrey is a great organiser." So they're very much pushing this as a sort of friendly device. Here we see on the side, "Audrey makes the internet easy," and a picture of a hot dog for some reason, don't know why. On the other side, "Audrey is an excellent communicator." And then here they're sort of showing things it can do, such as handwritten notes in an email, which we'll take a look at later, which I have to say is one of the most pointless features I've ever seen. On the back, we can see another picture of the device running a very dated looking website, and it sort of lists some functionality it has. So it's got the date book, which is a calendar, internet, address book, various other buttons it's got, channels, email, all that sort of stuff. On the back of the box at the bottom, it has a bit more information about it, where it says, "Audrey is not a computer, it is a new kind of internet appliance, simple to use and thoughtfully designed to fit perfectly into your home and life." So this is how they're marketing it, as a device just to use as a sort of secondary computer that's really easy to use to get on the internet. So yeah, that's the back of it. So now let's open this up and see what you get. So now let's take a look at what we have. So the box opens like this. And the first thing you get is a giant instruction manual. It's stupidly big. I've seen like road maps that are smaller than this, but that's it there. And it just shows the sort of stylus on the front and says this is all you need. So the whole marketing behind this is just easy to use, single device with some flowers on the back for some reason. It describes sort of warranties. And this is just like the level of instructions it has is like, how do I sync the date book? And it's an entire sort of page with 4 instructions on it. So it's all just designed to be as easy to use as possible for one of these things. Because bear in mind, when this was new, people had home computers, but they weren't nearly as common as they are today. So not everyone had the same sort of computer skills that they have nowadays. So it's got this really easy to use instruction manual, like 2 pages there for that. But yeah, and that shows like the original screen it starts up into. So that's the manual. Now we'll take a look at the device. So over here, it lists a sort of checklist of things you should have, where it says stylus, cable shield, phone cord, the Audrey itself, the power supply, some batteries for the keyboard, and apparently flowers aren't included. Yeah, so that comes out, and we can find the Audrey itself. So this probably isn't how it was originally packaged. I did just shove it in the box, so that can come off, and we'll take a look at what we have. So first thing we have is the Audrey itself. I'm going to take that out and we'll take a look at it later, because that's actually the interesting bit. And then what we also get is the wireless keyboard, which you can see here is absolutely tiny, but it's weird. It's really light to type on, but I can actually type on this and it's not too painful. It is wireless, but as you can see it's infrared, not RF, because this was sort of fairly common back in the day just to use infrared for things like this. And it actually works reasonably well, and it just runs on a pair of AAA batteries. Next thing you get is the stylus, which is one of the big things that's marketed with this because it's touchscreen, and this mounts into the top of the Audrey as you'll see later. So that's the stylus there. We're going to take a look at some of the cables it has. So the first thing we get is this, which is actually a sort of aftermarket thing, which is a USB to Ethernet adapter. This wasn't bundled with the Audrey originally, however it was sold as an optional accessory to connect it to a broadband network. Most of the time in the days when this was new, people had dial-up, so you used the built-in dial-up modem. This is a proper 3com branded part, and as far as I'm aware, there's very few USB to Ethernet adapters that work with this, so it's important to either get this one or get one that's similar you can flash firmware on to make it work. So that's sort of official one that 3com would have sold for the Audrey. We also have a manual for that USB adapter, because it wasn't just for the Audrey, it was sold as a standard part, so this is a manual for installing it on like a Windows PC or whatever. Next up, we have the AC adapter, which as you can see is a US model. Annoyingly, it's only 110 to 120 volts, so I can't just plug it in through a simple adapter. I'll have to use a step-down transformer, and I've clearly labelled it on the side so I don't forget and blow it up. This isn't a simple adapter, it does actually do 2 voltages, so it outputs 3.3 volts and 5 volts to the device, and connects over this sort of DIN plug. Then the final thing we get is just a standard telephone cord for the dial-up modem, which actually wouldn't even work in the UK because it's a US model. UK uses different style of phone sockets, but yep, you get just a pair of RJ11 connections. So now let's get this thing hooked up and see it running. So here we can see the Audrey all set up. So we have the keyboard, the unit itself, the stylus in the top, as well as the USB to Ethernet adapter around the side connected to my network. So now we'll plug it in and see it running. So the screen's now come on saying 3com proudly presents. The screen's very dim, so it's probably not going to come out much on camera, so I'll have to zoom into it later to show it. But we can see that's it starting up. And it's now loaded. So I'll go in closer so you can get a better view of it, and we'll take a look at some of the features. So I've now gone in a bit closer and adjusted the lighting to make the screen easier to read. So let's fire it up and see it run. That's us booting up. And we've now loaded. The screen really isn't that good. It's typical for sort of screens of this age, LCD screens anyway, but we can see it's now saying getting date and time from internet. So it actually connects out over NTP and pulls the latest date and time every time it boots. And that's it ready. Now what you're looking at here isn't the normal screen these would boot to. Also, here's a picture of what the normal screen looked like, which just showed you what buttons around the side to press, much like a cash machine. Would you just say press this button to access the internet, this button to access the date book, etc. This machine is actually running a modified firmware called Infinity U1.1S. This was developed as part of the sort of big hacking community that grew up around this once it had been discontinued. It's essentially exactly the same as the standard build and has all the same software. It just boots to a QNX desktop, which gives you a bit more functionality and allows you to access different software. So we'll take a look at some of the modded stuff, but we'll also take a look at the original things. So first of all, let's take a look at the original functionality of this. So, for example, if you wanted to load up your calendar, you press the calendar button here. This would then load the calendar application. And as you can see, it loads a sort of full screen application with big buttons, and it looks really easy to use. So in here, we can take the stylus, because you need to use the stylus for this, and we can do things like view the whole year, or view month and day. If you want to schedule an appointment, I can pick a time, and you can type an event name in. Or the feature that they've really pushed with this, because it's obviously a big thing for this sort of era, is handwriting. So you can put it to scribble mode, and you can write your event. But why would you? Because it's almost impossible to do. So the whole handwriting thing on this is interesting because a lot of stuff uses it, but it's fairly pointless because, first of all, if you lean on the screen, you'll activate it because it's resistive, and it's easier to write it on the keyboard. But yeah, you could invite people to an event, call it with a picture of a house or something it's not even a very good screen. But yep, it's got handwriting functionality. So that's how you can do events. And the idea with this is it syncs to your Palm PDA. So that's a big feature of this, is your events, your contacts, all that stuff would sync out to your Palm PDA, which you could connect over a serial port. So that's the date book. The next thing is the web browser, which we'll take a look at later. This doesn't have the original web browser because it's got the third-party firmware. It runs a different browser called QNX Voyager, which is it's got a bit more functionality. But essentially the browser it came with was just a very basic browser, this same sort of style as in like big buttons, and just very simple. I'll try and find a picture of it and put it up just so you can see what the original web browser looked like. The next thing you have is contacts, which you can pull up. This actually opens up over what you have open, so if you've got the date book open, or the browser, or your email, the address book opens up, and through here you can access email, phone, websites, and snapshots, which are just, I think, sort of screenshot things. And that's how you could do your address books. You can see there's a website in here called Shell. This is part of the sort of modded firmware. There was a sort of hack you could do if you went to a certain URL on it, that would pop up a QNX shell, and that's how the hacking sort of began on these. And that's just a link to that. But we'll take a look at all that later. So the final functionality of this is the email, which is probably the most interesting thing. So to access your email, you press this button down here, and that'll pull up the mail client. And here's the email. Now this mail client is obviously very old, very outdated, so it can only connect to a POP3 server and use unauthenticated SMTP. However, if you open the settings menu here, we can go into this, look at the mail options, you can see I've actually set up my own mail server on my local network. It's just running a VM on my desktop. It's just a random all-in-one mail server bundle thing I found, just to get a quick mail server set up, and it's been configured to allow POP3, use no encryption, and allow unauthenticated SMTP. So the Audrey can actually now send and receive emails just really to itself, to the local mail server, but it lets me play with the email functionality. So now let's look at actually using the emails on the Audrey. So I've got the Audrey here, and I've got my laptop running Thunderbird here, both connected to the same mailbox, just so we can view emails that it's sent, as well as send emails from the laptop to the Audrey, and just see how it all runs. So let's try and create a simple email on the Audrey. So if we hit create mail, it'll come up here, and we can put the email address in, which is very unmemorable, but me at audrey-mailserver.example.com. And you can see here that the Audrey really doesn't encourage good email subjects, given it automatically fills the email subject into read this. I'll leave that anyway, it's a bit amusing. then this is a test email. So there's the email. So I'm effectively sending it to myself, but the laptop should be able to get that. So let's send this email. And if we go over to the laptop and get the messages, there we go. My read this email's arrived. And we can see that that email's arrived on the laptop. What we're now looking at here is the source of the email that was received from the Audrey. So most of this is just server stuff coming in, spam assassin, all that sort of stuff. But one interesting thing down here is this header called x-ergo-message-type. And it's that set to typed. So that's interesting. So when you're sending emails from the Audrey, it has 3 different ways to send an email. You can send a typed email, which is a normal text email, a scribble email where you can sort of draw on the screen, or a voice email where you can send a voice recording. So what this looks like here is this, so if you're sending this to another person with an Audrey, which very few people probably did because not many people had them, the Audrey can detect what type of email it is and then act appropriately when it displays it. So it's actually got this custom email header in it, which is quite cool. So now while we're on the topic of different types of email, let's try and send a different one. So once again, we'll create a new email and put the email address in. And now we'll try a scribble email. So we can pick scribble here, and it now changes. It also changes the default subject to a much clearer, more intuitive one of look at this. Really not encouraging good subjects, but yeah. And now you could draw something here, so you could draw that on the screen and hit send. Now I don't know why you would want to do that because it's much quicker just to type it, but you can actually do drawn emails. Now if we receive that email on the Audrey, pops up saying you have a new email, and if you view this, it pops up saying test, so it shows the full, just shows the image and nothing else. Now if we compare that to what happens over on the laptop, if we get the email, and we open it, it says, you have an Ergo attachment, and you get the email with just that text and a file called ergoscribble.gif attached. So you actually get the image attached to your email. So I imagine that's what this header is doing. So if a normal mail client receives it, it displays the email body which contains you have an Ergo attachment. However, if another Audrey receives it, the Audrey will just display the image and no text. So I think it just lets this have a slightly better interface than this. But yeah, as you can see there, that is the scribble email. And now the final type of email we can do is voice. So let's create a new one. And now let's record. So we pick record here, and here we can tell we want to record the voice, so let's do that. This is a test of the audio recording on the 3com Ergo Audrey. So now we've done that, we can play it back.
This is a test of the audio recording on the 3com Ergo Audrey.
It's not brilliant, but we've done that, so let's send it. So if we send the email and then receive it on the Audrey, once again it gets the email, and when you open it, you get the full audio player. And when we play,
this is a test of the audio recording on the 3com Ergo Audrey.
and now if we were to receive this email on the laptop, we get the email in, comes in as before, but you get a thing again saying you have an Ergo attachment. And if you open this attachment, which is ergorecord.wave,
This is a test of the audio recording on the 3com Ergo Audrey.
so if you don't have an Audrey, you'll still get the email and you'll get a WAV file attached. So that's an interesting look at how the email works on this. And now as a final test, I'm going to send an email from the laptop to the Audrey with the Audrey sort of in sleep with the screen off, and we'll see how it notifies you. So I'm going to send the email, and now we have to wait. It'll take a little while because the Audrey only checks emails periodically, mainly because it would originally be designed for dial-up connections, so we'll have to wait a little while. But once it goes off, we'll come back and see it notifying you. So after a little while, the Audrey has now checked for its emails and it's detected it. So you can see it's flashing. So it's both flashing the email button here, as well as the stylus, which flashes. And that's why the stylus is sort of clear with this sort of triangle on the top. So it really lights up. It's quite an effective looking thing. And it's designed to be quite clear. So the email button flashes saying you've got an email. So all you need to do is press the email button and it wakes up. And if we go into here, we can pull that up and it shows there's my email. So it is designed quite well at looking at emails. So now we'll take a quick look at the sort of additional functionality provided by the third-party firmware this runs. So first thing we'll do is we'll open the web browser, which we press here, as before. But this time it loads up this QNX Voyager browser, which is a browser from QNX, which is the operating system this runs underneath, which is just got a lot more functionality than the original Audrey browser would have had. It does roughly work, so you can see there's it loading the QNX homepage, which is now owned by BlackBerry as far as I'm aware. Or RIM. And yes, there you go, it's a subsidiary of BlackBerry nowadays. But yeah, the browser is reasonably good at loading sort of relatively old websites. But yeah, this is it's the web browser you could use on this as a third-party thing. And this is the sort of stuff that people would have installed on these to make them a bit more usable after they've been discontinued, so it could still be used as a basic web browser. But yeah, that's the browser there. What you also have is some additional software provided as part of this third-party firmware. So you get things such as a VNC viewer, calculator, a caller ID and alarm clock we'll take a look at later, picture frames, so you could use this as a digital picture frame back in the days where that wasn't as big a thing. It's got an AIM client, it's got an MP3 player, real player, all that sort of stuff. So that's sort of software people would have installed on these to still give them a bit of a use even after they've been discontinued. One classic example of this is a caller ID, which is software built for these. So the idea would be that you'd plug the dial-up modem into your phone line, and when you got an incoming phone call, it could give you caller ID information. And that would be built into the Audrey suite, because not everyone's phones had that back in the day, so this could act as a caller ID. And here we have the caller ID program, which obviously I can't really use because I've not got a phone line that I use and things like that. But you can see, it gives you sort of information here. And there you go. Audrey caller ID, referred to as ACID, was the acronym they used for it. And that's there. So that was software that people built for these after they were discontinued. For those of you who aren't familiar with the QNX operating system this runs, QNX is a Unix-like real-time operating system that was developed in the 80s and sort of continued on, and it's still developed nowadays. It's now owned by BlackBerry. And it's built as an embedded real-time operating system, designed for devices like this and various other things, set-top boxes, places where a stable real-time operating system are required. And because it's Unix-like, we can actually use a terminal. So we can pull up a terminal in here, and as you can see, it's a Unix terminal running KSH. So ls works. There's very limited stuff on here, obviously. You can see there's bin, there is some stuff in bin. You can use some Unix commands. It's not got that much. It doesn't even have top actually, but you've got the tar command, shutdown, screen, NFS, so you can mount NFS on here, DHCP, cron tab, and all that stuff. The other cool thing is you do have a telnet client. So let's just quit that and telnet, and let's see if we can do the good old Star Wars thing. So telnet towel dot nl. Oh, we can see it's working, so see if we make this terminal bigger. There we go. So let's just wait a little second to see this running. It's sort of bugging out there a little bit. It's trying. It's sort of going there, yeah. So yep, it also supports telnet because it's Unix-like and it's got some Unix utilities on it. So we've now taken a decent look at the software on this, so now let's take a look at the hardware, where we'll take a tour of the outside of it, see what it's got, and then take it apart. So now let's take a look around the outside of the machine. So we've seen the front before. We've got a series of buttons around it, as well as this knob here that originally let you switch between sort of predefined channels, which were almost like websites. Here's the microphone, and here's the receiver from the infrared keyboard. On the top, you can see we have stereo speakers, as well as the holder for the stylus, which has a built-in LED to light it up. Now let's take a look around the back. So on that side, there's nothing. On the other side, we can see there's this, which is a volume up-down switch, as well as this, which is a cover that covers up a compact flash slot. The compact flash slot wasn't really used for anything when the Audrey was sort of sold as an appliance. The software didn't really support it. However, this can be used for firmware flashing. You can put a compact flash card in when it's booting up, press a key and have it load the firmware from the card. So that's one way people are sort of doing these mods, is they can tell it to dump the firmware to a card, mod it, and then load it back on again. I've had issues trying to get this to work. It seems to be really fussy with cards. I've tried 3 different compact flash cards and it's thrown weird errors with all of them. It's like it's not recognised the capacity properly. I think it's because they're all fairly modern cards that are just too large capacity for this. Next one in the back, you can see we've got this little bit of plastic that says Audrey on it. This can come off. Actually, one neat thing with this is you can actually mount the keyboard on here. So if you've got the original keyboard, there's some way that you can hang it on like that. So that was one of the designs of this actually. You can mount the keyboard on the back of it so it could sit neatly. So yeah, that's what that does. This bit of plastic also comes off. So you can just press these 2 things here, release it, and that just comes off and reveals the ports. So here you can see there's a sort of information label about it. And then on this side, you can see we have that sort of DIN connector which does the power, as well as the modem connections where you've got a connection to your phone line, as well as to plug your phone into this so you could sort of have a loop through. On the bottom, you can see we have an audio output, as well as 2 USB ports. The USB ports are used for that USB to Ethernet adapter. I'm not aware of anything else that could be used with this. I've even tried something simple like a USB keyboard and a USB mouse, and they just didn't work. So I think it only seems to work with that USB to Ethernet adapter. Although I imagine 3com possibly put 2 in to give you provision for in the future adding more functionality if this had actually taken off, which it very much didn't. On the side here finally, you then get a standard DB9 serial port, which you would use to connect your Palm PDA to sync. So you plug your sync cradle into this, and you could let it sync contacts and address book and email and all that sort of stuff. So now let's do the more interesting thing, which is take it apart and see what's inside. So now let's take this thing apart. So on the back there's just a bunch of Torx 9 screws, which are fairly easy to take out, and then once those are out it just opens. It's quite nice because it's not clipped together or anything, which is my main concern with this. So it's actually relatively easy to open, which is good because if it was clipped on something of this age, the plastic can become a bit brittle, and then you risk sort of completely damaging it. So just need to take those 5 screws out, and that should be enough to get the back off of it. Oh, give it there. Cool, so all those screws are now removed. So in theory, the back of it should just lift up. There we go. Back just lifts off with all the screws still in it. And then we can take a look at what we have here. So here we can see the inside, where we have this sort of metal cover covering everything. Don't worry, we'll get that off in a minute. And then here we have the speaker panel, which just is now loose, so that just lifts up and can sort of move about. The next thing we want to do is take this metal off so we can see inside. Now there's no screws holding that on. However, what it is held on by is the 2 sort of screws at either side of the serial port. So you take these 2 out, and that should now just let us lift that cover off. I don't think these are actually meant to hold back on or anything. I think they just happen to be in the way when you try and get it off. When I first took this apart, it took me a while to work out that that's why the back wouldn't come off. But now that's there, we should just be able to lift it up. So there we go. This lifts up. Sort of lift around the edges, carefully pushing these connectors down. And then we can just remove this metal sheet. There we go. And now that should just lift off. And what we are now looking at is the inside of the Audrey. So now let's take a look at the components that make the Audrey up. So inside we can see we have this raised board here that provides the rear I/O. I think it's really just raised just to get this closer to the back panel. There's not much on here, it's literally just the connectors and a few support chips. Now let's take a look at the actual more interesting bits. So over here we can see we have the main processor, which is a National Semiconductor Geode GX1. You've possibly heard of the Geode chips before in the context of AMD making them. Originally they were made by National Semiconductor, which later sold them off to AMD. So these are very low power processors. This is the GX1, which is 200 MHz and based on a Cyrix Media GX. So it's really not a powerful processor at all. However, the reason it's used here is because it's so power efficient. As you can see, there's absolutely no cooling or anything on this, because this chip has a power consumption of between 0.8 and 1.2 watts, which is basically nothing. Obviously it's not very powerful, but it is an x86 based chip, so it's more, so it is x86 and it can run the operating system and all the software in the Audrey absolutely fine. But yeah, that's the chip they've used there. You can see there's another Geode chip here, that's obviously some sort of support chipset type thing. And up there we can see another National Semiconductor Super I/O chip. Over here we can then see the compact flash slot, which has a little eject mechanism button on it and the lever that drives that. And up here we have this extra board on here, which I presume is going to be the modem, because it's sort of raised up. That won't be the modem. That will be the backlight driver, because it's on a raised board and it's next to a thing saying danger high voltage, which runs off over these two cables. So if I had to guess, this is actually going to be the backlight driver. Down here we can see a 3com chip, which is an AD1087JS. This is the modem itself, not that up there, that's the modem there. And around here we can see there's another little chip labelled Kojak. Kojak was the code name for the Audrey, so I'm guessing this is possibly the firmware, and that's like the flash that contains the firmware. This machine has 16 megs of flash and 32 megs of RAM. So what we'll now do is we'll try and take this board out and see if there's anything on the underside of it, and then see the screen as well. So to do that, there's a few little connectors here that have wires going into them, so I'm going to have to be extremely careful because flat flexes can be quite fragile, but we can just pull that out there. Same with this one here, which doesn't even have a retaining clip. Then there's a few connections at the top here, one to the backlight over here. That just pulls out, hopefully. There we go. And then there's these connections that go off the speakers and notification LEDs. Actually, no, the notification LED must be on the main board. But yeah, the speaker is plugging up here. So this can come out. That panel just moves off. And we've finally got another couple of connections here. So just disconnect all these. And that's a microphone there. Then that's infrared, that's labelled. So that's what those two do. And now those are disconnected. We should hopefully be able to remove the entire board from the machine. So the first thing is, the board is being held in by this knob. So the knob just pulls right off, and that will then release the board. So that's the board out. So on the underside of the board, we can actually see there are a few more components. So up here, that is the notification LED, so that's the one that flashes green. We can then see we have a couple other little bits over here. Here's some chips that look like RAM. They're all identical, so I imagine each of those is probably a 8 meg chip of RAM to make the total of 32 megs this machine has. Here's that rotary switch, which is used for that knob on the front. And then you can see here are the contacts for the individual switches on the front. So those buttons are just literally part of this sort of rubber sheet thing that just presses through, and they make contact with these pads on the board that actually activate the buttons. So it's a very simple construction. Down here you can then see there's another two LEDs. These are used to blink the email notification light. There's also space for a few sort of extra chips, so I don't know if that's for maybe extra RAM, just various things that are probably provisioned that were never actually utilised on this. Also interestingly up here, you can see the massive amount of clearance they've given for that backlight driver, because obviously this is really high voltage, so they've actually put quite a lot of clearance on the board for that. And now hopefully we can get down even further and see the backlight of the LCD, or see the actual LCD panel. So you need to be careful here, because these are all the individual buttons, and what happens when you take it apart, you forget about that, you rip it open and all the buttons fly everywhere. And I am totally not speaking from experience there. But yeah, this lifts up, as long as you're careful with it, like that. that lifts off. And I'm going to try and be careful with this so I don't knock all the buttons out. Over there. And take a look at the LCD. So here we have the LCD itself. There's some information there, so it's Panasonic actually. Caution high voltage. I'm not going to take the whole panel apart and try and get the touch driver out, that's how you break it, but there's the cable for the backlight there. Here's the driver here, so one of these is probably this is probably the video, and this is probably the data from the backlight, from the touchscreen, if I had to guess, but don't quite know. And then here's those two cables that go off to the infrared and LED. Or sorry, microphone. So down here we can see there's the microphone itself, which is a little module in a thing. And here we can see we have that infrared chip, or infrared receiver, which is just a single-sided board with just a little diode there, or transistor, and some components there that link it up to the main board. So the whole thing is has very simple construction. So yeah, that was a look at the inside of the Audrey. It's quite a nice little interesting device with its geode chip. So it's all x86, but very, very basic x86, very cut down. You see there? It's 3com and it's copyright 2000. Now interestingly, there is a few sort of headers here. So there's this one here that looks like an HD15. So I'm wondering if that almost looks like, you know, a VGA type thing, because I'm not sure what other sort of connector you'd have there. I suppose it could be a sort of debug header, but I wonder if that is like a VGA connector underneath, and that could be maybe some sort of drive connector. You know, there's definitely headers there that would have probably been just for debugging, possibly put in as provision in case they wanted that, like a VGA port or something. But yeah, there's a few sort of bits where there's no connectors that there probably could have been connectors added down the line. But yeah, time to get this whole thing reassembled and hope it goes back together properly, because these are not designed to be taken apart. I'm currently in the process of reassembling this. However, I found a few more things that point towards like connections that could have been added that weren't actually put in. So for example here, there's this 8-pin sort of space for a connector. And then down here, there's connections labelled activity, 10 base and 100 base. So I'm wondering if this would have sort of been for provision for onboard Ethernet, because 8 pins, that's what you'd have in an Ethernet connection. And then these LED headers sound like Ethernet. Then there's all these extra sort of chips, sort of areas around here that potentially could have had Ethernet controllers put on it. And over here as well, there's this sort of little thing with saying that's 6 pins, don't know what that would be. And then here there's another little sort of just 2-pin thing with one labelled positive. It's labelled BT1. So I imagine that's possibly for a battery to sort of back up the non-volatile memory. Sorry, the volatile memory. Because when it boots up, it goes in and sort of gets date and time from the internet. So there's obviously no sort of battery in this to store the date and time. However, I'm wondering if that's what this could have been. So they've definitely sort of put extra bits on this to allow for extra functionality to be added that was never actually put in. So yeah, that's quite interesting. Anyway, time to get back putting this together. So there you have it. That was a look at the 3com Ergo Audrey, which was definitely a product that just was a victim of the .com crash, and also it was just a bit ahead of its time. If you think about it, they're marketing these as sort of home second computers, the sort of device you'd have in your kitchen to check your emails. But if you think back to the year 2000, there was very little use for something like that. The sort of home user wouldn't really need their email that often, and it needed to be connected to the internet. Now that would either mean you needed to connect it to dial-up, which cost money usually per minute or whatever, and you'd have to pay connection charges sometimes. So having this device sitting constantly logging in and checking your email could be quite expensive. And then if you're on the phone and you want to use your phone, it's going to just be constantly dialing up. And of course you can use it on Ethernet, but even if you were one of the sort of lucky people in the year 2000 to have broadband, you didn't necessarily have wiring throughout your entire house or Wi-Fi or anything back then. So you wouldn't really have this in your kitchen unless you ran Ethernet to it. So the only other option would then be have it next to your computer, but what's the point? You've already got a computer. So there was just such a niche market for this. It just wasn't really suitable for so many people that there just wasn't enough demand for them to become popular, and ultimately they completely failed. But yeah, it's a very interesting device to take a look at, interesting hardware as well inside. But it's quite cool just to see a device that was a sort of concept that 3com and many other companies came up with, that they thought was going to take off and revolutionise how everyone used computers, and it just completely failed. So yeah, thank you very much for watching.